Will Cowling, another returning guest to David Anderson, talking market data. And again, as we said last time, this is all your fault because you're the one who suggested that I should do this. So anybody's got any complaints, go to Will Cowling. It was his idea. So Will, this second time you're on the podcast, I mean, you can do a very brief introduction, sort of where you're at, where you came from, why people should listen to you. I'm going to put your LinkedIn at the bottom of this. But we're focusing on reasonable commercial basis, which is part of the EU. Is it MiFID or MiFIR? You can explain that in a second. And I think you're going to talk specifically about the RTS. Again, you'll explain what that is. So, Will, I mean, what are we going to be talking about today? And why is this something that you're very interested in and focused on?
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me for a second time, and congratulations on the continued success of your podcast. I typed into ChatGPT, tell me the number one market data industry podcast in the world, and it came back with David Anderson talking market data.
I think I'm probably the only one, but anyway, it still counts. Number one.
So this will be relatively informative because there's a lot of information to get through. But the RCB change, as it's colloquially called, is the European exchanges, the EU exchanges, are making changes to their fees and policies in the fourth quarter of 2026. And in fact, I would say that combined with the introduction of consolidated tapes and maybe AI licensing, 2026 is probably the biggest concentrated year of change in market data licensing this century.
From what I'm seeing, I totally agree with you. So, it's a massive topic. And we're not going to cover it in its entirety on this podcast. I think you and I were chatting beforehand. I think this lends itself to almost to a series of podcasts, and I would welcome comments on this. But if anybody out there from whichever part of the industry, if you're an exchange, if you're an aggregating data vendor, if you're a customer firm, if you're just a consultant observing on this, if you have things to say on this, we will welcome more guests on the podcast talking about this. And again, going into a bit more detail, I'm going to put...
I'm just going to say on that I think that would be very useful because, I mean, the reason we're doing this podcast now is so that we can bring the information to the market data industry, which is much notice as possible. But the exchanges, the European exchanges, have been extremely good at sending out early notifications. And this is much appreciated and very useful. And in conjunction, FISD, led by Tom and Tristan and Tracy, have been extremely good at having special calls to the industry on the data vendor constituency group and the consumer constituency group, where they've invited exchanges on to explain the new policy. This has been a really excellent example of the industry working together with early notifications on such an important topic.
And I think that's been necessary because, as we're going to dig into it, it's quite complicated. So I think the more discussion and the earlier people can think about this, the better prepared they will be. So I think that, and I will put you shared with me the EU document link. So if anybody wants to read the actual legislative writings, there will be a link in the description of this podcast. I'll put Will's LinkedIn. I'll put a link to FISD that Will graciously mentioned just now. And if there are other links that are pertinent, we might add those in as well. Let us dive in.
And I think people should look at that link and they should bookmark it. It's going to be important for the next few years for everyone in the market industry to know about where the regulation is and what it says.
Absolutely. And maybe like I did, they can ask ChatGPT or Notebook LM, but then you end up with pages of summary. I mean, there's a lot of detail here. And I think our aim, Will and I today, is to educate on some of that. We can't do all of it. Maybe, Will, you'll come back for your third podcast with me to explain a bit more detail. So let's kick off. We've touched base on it. We'll set the scene on what this is, and I think you've already alluded to the dates. So what is it? And then we're going to go through in a bit more detail, but just the high-level introduction of what it is, and maybe you've already alluded to this. Why should people be taking note, and maybe which different types of people should be most interested in this?
Okay, I'm not going to talk about the history today because otherwise we'd take too much time. So let's just get straight into what is happening, and then after that we can talk about what people need to do to prepare and what actions they need to take. So the updated regulation was published last year on the 12th of June 2025, and it's known as the Regulatory Technical Standards on the obligation to make market data available to the public on a reasonable commercial basis. So you'll hear the acronyms RTS, which is Regulatory Technical Standards, and you'll hear the acronyms RCB, which is Reasonable Commercial Basis. In the new regulation, in the new Regulatory Technical Standards, there are 28 articles. So that's an expansion of the previous regulation, which had about 9 in relation to reasonable commercial basis. Article 27 out of the 28 says that the regulation shall apply from the 23rd of August 2026.
And you and I had, when we were chatting beforehand, that is the date that the regulation goes into effect, and therefore when exchanges and those consuming should be acting on this. So I think the thing we're going to talk about in a second, and you've already alluded to it, some information is coming out earlier than that because people need to prepare. And we're talking about the exchanges who are issuing these new policies, and then we're talking about the customer firms, banks, and buy-side institutions who have to implement processes and what have you to comply with those new policies. And all of that happens before August the 26th, did you say? Was it 26th or 23rd?
23rd of August 2026. Yeah,
Right.
And you couldn't have described it better. That's the reason we're doing this podcast now. That's the reason the exchanges are doing the notifications. That's the reason the FISD have done announcements, is so that everyone is aware and can prepare and take action. I mean, no doubt it doesn't stop on the 23rd of August. There'll be actions to be taken afterwards. Market data goes on forever. It never stops. But there's certainly people do need to make them operationally as optimal as possible. They need to take actions now.
And I think one clear direction to all heads of market data or senior people in firms is that they should cancel all summer vacations of all their staff who are planning to go away and enjoy themselves in July and August. And everybody should stay in the office. Is that what you're saying, Will?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's I guess that's
that was a joke, but I fear there's a serious part to that as well.
Well, no, there is a serious part because clearly the amount of work that potentially needs to be done is going to be impacted by, the existing work and the fact that that we have the summer in between. But nevertheless, let's just get into what's happening and what needs to be done, and we can make it as informational as possible.
We're going to go through exchange by exchange, which I think is going to be very helpful. Are there any of those 28 clauses? Are some of them more important than others? Are there any worth a quick comment on that, just to explain them? Is that appropriate, or do we do that at the end? I'll leave it up to you as to whether we talk about it and when we talk about it.
No, that's a good question. So in my opinion, there's 2 articles out of the 28 that have caused the most significant change in the exchange fees and policies. So of the 28 articles, the article that has resulted in the biggest change to licensing models is Article 5.1D,
right,
which outlines that different fees can be charged for different categories of clients. But this is the crucial thing. Only one category is applicable per client.
And that's quite a big change, isn't it? Because up until now, if you're a client, you'd pay lots of different fees for different businesses, different use cases or whatever. So, okay. So that
in itself has driven a lot of the change.
Yep.
And the second article I'd mentioned that has caused some change, and as we go through them, I'll highlight where this has caused a change, is Article 15. And this is the contractual provisions on audits. And let me just read it. It says, Article 15A, the audit request is based on specific and credible indications of potential infringement that occurred no more than 5 years prior to the date the audit is notified. So the crucial thing about this to understand is that exchanges will not be able to audit clients unless they have credible indications of infringement.
And it's a bit like, I think there's an analogy with the police force. You can't just barge into somebody's home. You can't just stop people and question them unless you've got a reasonable suspicion that they're breaking the law. There's a protection on us as human beings in the criminal justice system. And I think this is a sort of mirroring of that in our world of market data.
Yep.
Look, shall we plow in? I mean, there's a lot to cover here. We're only going to talk for an hour on this occasion. We might have to do a sort of part two, and we'd be very interested to hear requests from the wider audience about what would be useful. So Will very graciously sent me a long list of all the exchanges. And at a high level, and this is a question I asked Will just before we started, this is an EU regulation, and this applies to all the exchanges that are domiciled in the EU and fall under EU regulations, and it regulates, how they should charge for their market data fees. But the question I asked, if you're in Singapore, if you're in Sydney, if you're in Toronto, do you care? And Will, answer that question for the audience. You answered it for me, but answer for the audience.
Yeah, so it's the exchanges that are regulated, but their policies and fees apply to every consumer in the world.
So if you're buying from any of these EU domiciled exchanges, listen to this. Okay, right. Let's hit this. So there's a list in alphabetical order, and Will's going to comment on those briefly, I think, because we've the time. So AQUIS Exchange. Who's that owned by? Is that owned by SIX now?
Yes, and I don't think I've seen a notification yet from AQUIS. But as you say, it's worth mentioning all of them just so that we can be comprehensive.
Okay. And then BME, Bolsas y Mercados Españoles. That was my worst Spanish accent.
So again, I don't think I've seen a formal notification from the Madrid Stock Exchange, from BME, although I did see the April 2026 price list that the BME had produced, and they do list their normal non-display, the normal categories of use, such as display, non-display, use of data in trading applications, other non-display usage, and non-display data usage for feeding trading systems. And they had a paragraph in there saying that every combination of those results in a single customer category. But I don't think that possibly doesn't necessarily fully comply with the regulations, because out of a combination of, 5 bullet points, you get 31 different categories. So, and I think the regulation is asking the exchanges to have a limited number of categories. But again, BME may have, but may still yet to be providing a formal notification.
Do you get any sense, because they're owned by, AQUIS and BME, I think, are under the SIX umbrella. Now, SIX Swiss Exchange is, again, I always get confused about Switzerland. Does that fall under this EU regulation? I mean, Switzerland is not part of the EU. So is the Swiss Exchange in any way? Because they have sort of mutual agreements, don't they? Switzerland and the EU.
They have what they call equivalence for Switzerland, but I don't think we should necessarily expect any changes from the Swiss exchange for RCB.
And an adjunct question is, should we expect all the exchanges that fall under the SIX umbrella to have the same policies, or might they be different? Again, I don't know if that's a fair question to ask.
I don't know. I don't know whether AQUIS and BME will have the same policies, but they don't at the moment.
Okay, interesting to watch. Let's keep on our journey through Europe. Bucharest Stock Exchange, Romania.
Nothing. There's no notifications as yet for Bucharest.
Budapest in Hungary.
Nothing as yet from Budapest.
CBOE Europe. CBOE Europe. They have.
So CBOE have produced some notifications. Let me just get my notes as to what they are. So the CBOE have introduced, remember we're talking about categories, so that'll be a common theme. So CBOE have introduced 7 non-display categories. And again, we should note that a customer can only be in one category. CBOE have introduced redistribution as a type of non-display category. So formerly on licenses and fees, redistribution was separate to non-display. And now redistribution is included within non-display. And the final point to note in relation to CBOE is that they've introduced a new commercial product called Level 3, which is market by order. So formerly they had Level 1 and Level 2, but now in addition they have Level 3.
Now, I like you, I've seen our good friend Steve Dorian presenting on this to sort of FISD groups, and I'm sure he's talking to lots of people. I'm sure CBOE people are talking to lots of people. Is it all described on their website? If you go onto the CBOE Europe website, is it being?
Yes.
Okay, so that people can go and have a good look at the CBOE Europe website. Okay, CBOE Europe, obviously, not CBOE globally, because that's US. Okay. Then we go on to Germany, Deutsche Börse. Again, I've seen they've made, Gerrit Marx, I think, was making interesting statements. But Will, give us a ride around the world of Deutsche Börse.
So Deutsche Börse have introduced 7 market data client categories. Again, they've also had the inclusion of redistribution as a non-display category. The interesting nuance with Deutsche Börse is that they have separated products into what they've called, one is MIFIR information products and 2 global information products. So that will have a significant effect on the market data industry in their use of Deutsche Börse products and the resulting actions that vendors and consumers need to take. Oh, you asked at the start who's affected by this. So it's the whole market data industry is affected by this. So it's the consumers of the data, it's the vendors who are also consumers of the data and redistribute the data, plus all of the related industries such as the inventory management and entitlement providers.
Yeah. So there's a lot of busy work to be done on all of this.
So with Deutsche Börse, I just mentioned they had MIFIR information products and global information products. The core products have been assigned to MIFIR information products, and the ultra products have been assigned to the global information products. Yeah. So that wasn't necessarily expected by the whole of the industry, and so the difference between core and ultra is that you'd have additional information in relation to the depth of market in the ultra product and some improved latency. But when we asked Deutsche Börse as to why ultra has not been included in the regulation, it was because Deutsche Börse said because it is an optional product and therefore not required to be regulated. But the reason that has ramifications is because I don't know the exact percentage numbers, but I believe the ultra products are quite widely used.
So I think that's a subtlety that we're introducing to the conversation. You've got exchange entities that have a global footprint, so only part of their footprint is in Europe. And then also exchanges who have multiple layers of products. And there's a point to be made that maybe some layers of those products don't fall under the EU regulation. All subtleties, nuance, colour that is worth better understanding.
Yeah. And as I say, I personally hadn't expected that. So that will take a bit of adjustment.
Cool.
For the MiFIR information products, Deutsche Börse have removed the non-display type of use categories. So, such as trading as principal or trading on behalf of your customer or trading platform, that's all been removed and it's now just non-display. That's for the MiFIR information products, i.e. the core products. But those non-display types of use remain for the global information products. So now there's two different categories of non-display licensing depending on whether you're in the MiFIR information products or the global information products.
Let me ask a general question. We're going to go through the list, but a general question. With this idea of a client only falling into one category, that obviously seems simpler. So simplification, I think, was the objective or an objective. But it doesn't necessarily mean it'll be cheaper or more expensive or the same. I mean, it could affect what a particular client is paying, one up or down or the same.
Yeah, and I believe consumers of the data are currently looking at these policies to try and see how their costs are affected.
Got it. Okay, let's move on.
So there's a couple more things to mention in relation to Deutsche Börse. So there is an adjustment to the non-display device count tiering. So previously, Deutsche Börse had, I think, 3 or 4 tiers, but now there's the number of tiers has increased. So what that means is you don't just pay for non-display, you also pay depending on the number of devices that you have connected with your non-display application. And those tiers have changed. Now, device counting, it was already important and already very difficult to do, but it now becomes, it's still important, if not more important, because of the increase in the device counting tiers. And it's very difficult to count devices in relation to a non-display device.
We could go down the rabbit hole now. Is it clear what the word device means? Is there a precise, unambiguous definition of what a device is?
As you say, we won't go down that now. We just have to refer the audience to look up the definition of device in each exchange policy.
There are multiple rabbit holes throughout this, so we won't go down them, but we'll acknowledge them. If we're done.
Unfortunately, we're not. There's one more crucial thing to let people know in relation to Deutsche Börse. So Deutsche Börse have introduced a new section 2.9 in the reporting guidelines. And this states that, let me just read it, the market data client shall report annually on a calendar year basis all data files and records produced by the entitlement system employed, e.g. audit trail, for its internal usage, including display and non-display usage. So just to repeat that in shorter terms, Deutsche Börse will require every consumer of market data to upload their entitlement audit trails to Deutsche Börse on an annual basis.
I'm going to add a comment in here about this point. We may go, if Will's gracious enough, we may go longer than an hour. I'll put chapter headings clearly in this. And again, a little trick I've learned in both Spotify and also YouTube is you can always listen at 1.5 times or 2 times, and make Will and I suddenly go, but again, if you want to get through this quicker or watch it in different parts. So onwards and upwards.
Onwards.
We're not Euronext, which is arguably a really big beast in the EU world. I've noticed on this list, I mean, you've got a sub-list of Italiana, Amsterdam, Brussels, Dublin, Lisbon, Paris, and Oslo Bourse, which were the long-standing. And then I think, is Athens a recent acquisition by Euronext?
It is. It is. And in fact,
and Cyprus.
Yeah, we're speaking today in May, and Athens has just rebranded itself this month as Euronext Athens, and Athens includes Athens and Cyprus.
Do you believe that therefore there will be an umbrella policy from Euronext on all of the different sub exchanges within it?
Yes, I think that eventually it goes. At the moment, there is a slight difference between Euronext Athens and Euronext, but I imagine that they're fairly well aligned.
And what's the big picture from Euronext?
So Euronext, the points to note, they've introduced 9 non-display categories. Again, remember that customer can only be in one category. And again, Euronext have included redistribution for the first time as a non-display category. And we would encourage all consumers to look at the Euronext website to see what those 9 categories are.
Was it Euronext, or am I getting muddled, who was saying they wanted people to sort of almost self-categorize? Was that, were they one of the entities that said, look at this and decide which one? Well, I suppose all entities do that to some degree, but whether Euronext had said that explicitly.
Well, all entities will have to do that in reality. You'll have to decide where you categorize. I think that one of the things that Euronext are asking is for every customer to recontract or repaper with them, which effectively means redeclaring, and therefore during that repapering, recontracting process, you'll have to, as a consumer, you'll have to make sure you're in the right category.
And again, well, we'll comment about repapering, whether all of these exchanges require repapering or some taking a different stance.
Well, we can comment on it now. I think it's probably possibly only Euronext which will require the actual repapering, but I imagine at some stage most of the exchanges will need some sort of declaration in relation to the consumer's category. But that'll, in reality, that's going to be too much paperwork to ensure that 100% of the market data community globally adheres to that. So I would expect the exchanges, Euronext, for example, if there's no correspondence with the consumer, although I'm sure they'll try and contact every customer, but I would expect them, Euronext, to allocate a category to each client.
Got it. Okay.
Couple of things to mention in relation to Euronext. So they have included derived data as chargeable within non-display. So previously derived data was separated from non-display. Now the use of derived data is included within non-display. Another thing to mention with Euronext, again similar to CBOE, they've also introduced level 3 market by order fees. So that's an additional entitlement product. And again, similar to Deutsche Börse, Euronext have introduced new non-display device tiers. So they've increased the number of tiers, i.e. if you've got devices, I haven't got it in front of me, but let's say it's 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 50, something like that. And so depending in which tier you're in, it depends on how much you pay as a customer.
You just used a word then, similar to, not identical to, but similar to, because again, a macro view of all this is there was already difficulty, angst, if you will, about if you're a customer firm and dealing with 100 or 200 or 400 different exchanges, effectively you had to understand 400 different policies. And now those 400 different policies are all going to change and all remain different. Is that?
It's not. There's not 400, but obviously I'm
exaggerating for effect.
But then perhaps when you extrapolate the complexity and maybe 400 different items. But no, they're not. The exchange policies are not uniform with this before or, in fact, after this change. If anything, after this change, they're less similar than they were before.
Which is going to be an ongoing industry issue, which we can't solve now, but it's just something to be aware of. Again, cancel those summer holidays. Are we done with Euronext?
Yes, I guess we should mention Euronext Athens, as you alluded to earlier. So the only thing different between Euronext Athens and Euronext is that they have not introduced the licensing tiers based on the number of devices. So in other words, with Euronext Athens at the moment, you still just pay a non-display fee for your firm. It's not dependent on the number of devices using number of non-display applications.
Unlike Euronext General.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's a reasonable assumption that at some point they will fall in line with the more sort of the general Euronext approach.
Yeah, obviously
we don't know, but that could happen.
I guess there's one other point to note on Euronext Athens is that, I mean, Euronext already had this policy, but Euronext Athens have aligned with Euronext. Euronext Athens have introduced natural user netting for display use.
Got it. Okay. Now, this is an interesting one because ICE, Intercontinental Exchange, being a US exchange, but they have ICE Index. I confess I'm not familiar with that one. And ICE Futures Europe. What's going on there?
So those are the two ICE futures products based in Europe. But ICE Futures Europe, the old Life, which you remember from your trading days, that's regulated in the UK. So that's not necessarily affected by the change in regulation. ICE Index is based in the Netherlands and therefore will be affected by the regulation, but I have not seen any notification from ICE Index.
Okay. Liquid Net, we're doing this alphabetically.
But I've seen nothing from Liquid Net, no.
Okay. Then another interesting one is London Stock Exchange Group, the LSE, and specifically Turquoise. But again, London Stock Exchange is a UK entity, but then Turquoise, has a European. Well, explain London Stock Exchange Group in this context.
You've explained it. So most of London Stock Exchange is not affected, but it's their Turquoise EU arm which has had to change their policies. So what they've done is introduce 6 non-display categories, and again, there is now one of those categories is redistribution, which is non-display. The new categories are determined by the number of subcategories applicable for your firm. And these subcategories are redistribution, non-display principal, non-display client facilitation, non-display other, and trading platforms. So effectively what Turquoise EU have done is taken their existing subcategories of non-display and created, using combinations of those, created single categories. The only slight difference is that redistribution is now included in that.
Cool.
But there's one important point to note, which might be industry changing. So London Stock Exchange Turquoise EU introduced in one of their guidelines section 2.6 called periodic submissions and attestations. I won't read it all out. I'll just read the first line. It says the customer is required to, upon request, submit entitlement reports directly to the exchange.
Is this these are things like DAX or
exactly
ERMDS or whichever I can never get the acronym right for Bloomberg. EMRS, is it?
EMRS, yeah. So this, do you remember we talked about the articles, important articles at the start, and we mentioned one of them was the articles related to audits, and the fact that you cannot audit unless there's a potential infringement has been observed. So the reason Deutsche Börse and Turquoise have introduced these new policies is so that their policy requires entitlement reports to be sent, in Deutsche Börse's case, mandatory annually, in Turquoise EU's case, upon request, and therefore that gets removes the need to have to require people to audit only if there's a potential infringement, because effectively you're required under the policy to send in the audit trail data. And that's going to be, I think, certainly if it's a trend, but even just with those two exchanges, that could be industry changing, because sending in audit trails and making these audit trails understandable to the exchange is a complex task.
So historically, up until now, basically exchanges would go in to conduct an audit. They would turn up at the exchange, and then they would look at all the reports coming out of things like DAX and the MRS, etc. That audit trail, those entitlement reports would be part of an audit process.
Absolutely.
And so the exchanges that you just mentioned are not auditing. When they ask for these reports, that isn't technically again, it's semantics here. Is that auditing? I
guess in reality, it's almost continual auditing.
Yeah,
it's continual live auditing.
And I mean, again, being a bit naive, well, what's the problem? Hey, all these sophisticated customer firms have got all these sophisticated entitlement systems. They just press a button, there's a report, send it to the exchange. No problem. Why is this potentially problematic or worrying? Or isn't it?
I don't think it's a problem to be continually audited. It's because actually audits help the whole industry, because they ensure that A, people are paying for what they're using, but B, if you make sure that if you're a consumer, if you're paying, you want to make sure everybody's paying. You don't just want to be the only people paying. But the difficulty in relation to continual audits is the complexity of receiving this information, reconciling it, and making it, because to receive audit trails, you'll have them from multiple vendors or from internal applications, and then you need inventory management tools and application inventory management tools to map this to the declarable counts, which then get mapped to the invoice. So you can't just take an audit trail and say map it to the invoice. You need a number of tools in between to map the two.
And historically, during an audit, representatives from that user firm, from XYZ Bank, would be talking to ABC Exchange and explaining what line 3 on this report means and what the cool application Z is. And human beings talking to human beings explaining it. Whereas if you just send it without explanation, understanding might fall short. Anyway, that's to be watched, that one, and welcome comments from anybody.
I guess also the other thing, for completeness, sending this amount of information, I imagine consumers will want to make sure that their data is secure when they're sending this information.
Does GDPR kick in? Non-identifiable personal information and things like that. Will it just be user 1, user 2, user 3, or will it be David Anderson and Will Cowling? Don't know.
Well, typically it's a login ID and what that login ID is entitled for. But that login ID may have personal information in it, but never, or it just may just be sensitive information on its own. I would imagine a number of consumers will want to make sure that this data is very securely passed to the exchanges.
Does that mean there's a role here to be helpful from the likes of my old company now, LSEG Data Analytics with DAX, Data Access Control System, and Bloomberg with, do you remember what EMRS stands for? But their EMRS product. And then you mentioned the inventory management companies, Calero and TRG Screen, etc. I mean, do you think we're going to see, can those firms help?
Yeah, there's going to be a role for everybody. That's what it's going to be industry changing, but because this is brand new, it's only been announced this month. It's
an opportunity for the sort of service industry, the ecosystem that helps everybody in our industry, not the core principles, but that ecosystem of technology and service providers to help. So watch this space. Luxembourg. Nil point. Sorry, I was getting carried away. It's like the Eurovision Song Contest.
Funnily enough, nil points are appropriate because Luxembourg are not going to make any changes to their policy.
Okay. And then another US NASDAQ Europe, though, not NASDAQ, but NASDAQ Europe. And do I need to read this? It's all the old, the Nordic, a lot of Nordic exchanges, Copenhagen, Helsinki, Iceland, Nordic, Riga, Stockholm, Tallinn, Vilnius, etc.
Yeah, so that's actually quite a lot of exchanges. So NASDAQ Europe is quite important in European terms, in terms of the number of markets. They have not yet sent out a formal notification of what they're doing. So we may either need to do a follow-up podcast or an addendum to this podcast, or you'll need to speak to NASDAQ directly on a podcast.
Okay. Now that as you say, that's a pretty big one. Then we've already mentioned it briefly, SIX Swiss Exchange.
Yeah, so I have not seen any changes for them, and maybe we won't see them because, as we say, they're only regulated via equivalence.
Got it. Okay. Warsaw Stock Exchange in Poland.
I've not seen anything yet from Warsaw. No.
Okay. Wiener Börse, or the Vienna Stock Exchange, which also, I think they're a group. They've got, God, my pronunciation is going to be terrible here. Ljubljana, Prague, Vienna, obviously, and Zagreb.
They have not yet announced, but they do. They are at the FISD special call for the data vendor constituency group and possibly the consumers constituency group towards the end of May. So they will be announcing soon.
Got it. Okay,
Again, we may need an update to the podcast, or you'll have
late breaking news and all that.
You'll have to have a direct conversation with them. It would be useful for you to have.
No, I repeat if anybody from an exchange wants to do the podcast, and I've seen some of the briefings that they have done to an FISD audience. If they want to do that to a wider audience, they would be most welcome to jump on. David Anderson talking market data. Then we got one. Well, I must admit, I've not heard of this. Fair CT. I'm unfamiliar with them. Who are they?
So Fair CT are the new consolidated tape for bonds.
And who's behind that? Remind me, which company is that? I forgot.
It was Edify was the company that won the mandate. They haven't published their new fees and policies yet, although I would expect them to strongly align with the new reasonable commercial basis rules. I would imagine they will publish towards the end of this year, because if they go live next year.
Okay, and then that segue onto Euro CTP, which I am familiar with, more familiar.
Yeah, so Euro CTP had published, because they go Euro CTP, which is the equity consolidated tape. They go live in the middle of July, and Euro CTP's policies are very relatively simple. They just have one non-display fee, which includes the right to redistribute, and then there's a display fee as well. And I think that's for professional users. It's free of charge for retail. So their policies are simple to understand and definitely comply with the new regulations. And I think that was when EuroCTP designed the policy. That was very much by design, because one of the reasons for them being accepted as the new consolidated tape provider was they had to comply with the regulations.
And you managed to confuse me, because that's not an alphabetical order. Suddenly, after Wiener, which begins with a W, we had Fair and Euro. But hey, I'll forgive you for your lack of alphabetization or whatever it was. So, that's a pretty good list. Have we literally covered every single entity that falls under the EU exchange, MiFID, RTS, RCB. Is that a definitive list, or was that just a summary list?
I'd like to say that's a definitive list, but then every time I say that, you go, "Oh, I've forgotten one." But
It's like Bratislava and
let's
things
assume it's definitive.
Okay, it's as definitive as it needs to be. And again, if we've missed anybody, apologies. And again, if somebody wants to come on from somebody we've missed, they would be most welcome. So I think that takes us as a segue into, what do people have to do? When I say people, there are different people. When I say people, different roles out there. I think we've talked about the regulated markets themselves. Have we talked enough about them? Is there any more of a requirement? They're communicating. You've been praising some of them for actually communicating early on, which I think has been helpful. Any other comments about what the exchanges are doing beyond? We've gone through in some detail already.
So if you look at this like a project plan, I'm sorry to use the word project within a podcast, but we're at the notification phase. The previous phase was the designing of the policies and the feedback with the industry in relation to the policies. Now the policies have been designed and they're now being notified. And then very soon after that becomes the actionable phases that the consumers of the data need to take to manage their operations in relation to the new fees and policies.
And I mean, if you're sitting in, a bank or a buy side, if you're an institution that is contracted with quite a few of these venues, apart from listening to David Anderson talking market data, what else should you be doing?
So I'll go through the main points, and it's not just consumers of market data in the traditional sense, also vendors that are affected. So anybody, anybody
aggregating data vendors who are a bit. I always think they're a bit like consumers because they're extracting the data from the exchanges and then publishing it.
But also their fees and policies, the amount they pay is potentially changing because remember I mentioned a few times, redistribution is now a non-display category. So what do people need to do? Well, in some case, we've alluded to some of this as we've been speaking, but I'll just go through it briefly. So we talked about the fact that in some cases, consumers will need to recontract with the exchange. For example, Euronext. So that's point number one. We talked about the new entitlement products. So where level 3 is being created in the case of Euronext and CBOE, vendors and consumers will need to make sure that the level 3 entitlement product is available. So this is available in so you can permission individual login IDs for the new entitlement product. And then once the product's available, you need to actually do your demand management to make sure the new entitlement products are available to consumers. And then the consumers need to say, well, which product do I need to be entitled for, and which one do I need to be decommissioned on?
And again, my simplicity, there's a layering to this. Yeah, if you're a really big bulge bracket bank or a big, sophisticated, large entity, if you're the market data exchange compliance person, then you've got to really, look through this in detail and work out what you've got to do. But then does that person in the market data group then have a significant job discussing with their internal users? Do they have to better understand their own internal consumption and make sure all of that is in line? Or is it it's just the exchange data compliance person? Is it only their problem?
No, absolutely. They need to do the demand management and permission it, and then make sure the optimized permissions are then pulled into their inventory systems. So there is, and in fact, talking of inventory management, the new commercial products need to be set up in the inventory management systems and then associated with the entitlement IDs and applications. And crucially, when you're doing that, you need to make sure that the device counts are recorded. Because you remember when we spoke about some of the exchanges, the importance of the number of devices that are using the non-display application affects your fees.
I don't know if have you had any conversation with sort of any of the major inventory management companies? I mean, I'm obviously Calero, I'm aware of TRG Screen, BST are the ones I'm sort of most familiar with. I mean, do you reckon they are already engaged on this? Have you heard anything?
Well, typically with an inventory management system, it's the consumers themselves that create and set up these products within the inventory management system, unless it's a managed service.
Got it. So in other words, yeah, it's a tool that has to be populated by the customer. And I presume that's the same with things like DAX and EMRS. It isn't necessarily the LSEG or Bloomberg having to worry about that. It's how you set up your DAX or your EMRS.
Well, so the entitlement systems, if they don't have it already, where there's an L3 product, they will have to create that as an additional entitlement. But then it's up to the consumers to decide who gets permissioned for which entitlement product.
So this is a process that's happening up until August the 23rd of this year.
Up in reality, it'll be up until and beyond. I imagine this will go on for a year or so.
Of sort of fine tuning. I mean, any sense of how aggressive, is that the right word? How strongly the regulator will police this? Is there any sense of that? Do you think the regulator will get at all involved in checking that their regulation has been correctly implemented?
Not down to the level that we've discussed, I shouldn't think, no.
Yeah. So what?
But in association with inventory management, and this I can't emphasize enough, and funnily enough, this is what I spoke about on the previous podcast, firms also need an application inventory. This is so important now. And it's a must for most firms already, but so in the application inventory, I'm talking about capturing the application name, the application exchange product, and the permissions, the application device counts. Again, we come to this device counts, and the application types of use. And then these types of use will then be mapped to the new post RCB types of use, the categories. And once you have this information in the application inventory, you can then import it into your main inventory system.
I mean, maybe that begs the question that's in my head. Whether you agree or disagree with this or whatever, are these changes that are happening, are the systems that are in place at the moment, are the capabilities that are typical in a large or a medium-sized bank, etc., is anything non-implementable? In other words, it might be. I've heard instances where exchange policies have come out, and separate to whether they're good or bad or agreed or disagreed, it's just my systems that I've currently got don't enable me to comply with that without me changing my systems quite significantly, which has a cost in pound, shilling and pence or dollars. And in time, I can't just rewrite my systems overnight. Is there anything in all of this that is difficult to implement if you're sitting in a consumer firm?
No, it's all implementable. I mean, I think obviously most firms have a procurement and contract management system, and they all have entitlement products and inventory management systems. The thing that's, regardless of this, the thing that's not existing in every firm, only exists in a subset of firms, is this application inventory. So firms should implement application inventory. Once you've implemented the contract and the entitlements and optimized them and put it into your inventory management system and pulled in your application inventory, you're then in a position where you can accurately make an assessment on how much these changes are going to cost you. And then when you've worked out how much it can cost you, you can then set your budget for the next year.
I mean, there's a lot of work coming up, but can you foresee any obvious mistakes that could be made innocently or what? Where do you think the perils and pitfalls in this, where people could fall down and therefore we could pre-warn them now on this podcast, watch out for this or think about this more? I mean,
yeah, I mean, we're highlighting really. I mean, obviously you want to make sure that you're contracted in the right category. You want to make sure that you're counting the correct number of devices, because if you have too many devices, then you're pushed up to the upper echelons of the tiers or into the enterprise zone, and it just makes it more expensive for you. And then the new bit is this continual auditing, this uploading of audit trails that will require additional processes to be created.
Okay. Well, look, actually, we're at 55 minutes or whatever, so we've actually done this quite neatly within the typical 1 hour. I thought when we were going through that list of exchanges, we might have been going on longer. I mean, we're going to wrap up now. Any final thoughts? Anything that you wish we talked about on this topic that we've forgotten to talk about?
Just to reiterate that there'll be more updates to come, and if it's through the medium of this podcast or FISD announcements or other trade association announcements such as IPUG, or just more notifications from the exchanges, people should just watch out for them, and they should also start to put in place their project plans to make sure that they can comply from a contract entitlement, inventory management and application management, declarations and uploading audit trails perspective.
Will, brilliant. I think we've done a good job so far, and I think there's more to come. Watch this space. Thank you so much. People out there, please get in contact with Will or myself, and again, I'm happy to do more podcasts on this. Everybody knows I still work with FISD closely. I'm part of the FISD staff family. So if FISD can do any more, or as Will alluded to, I know IPUG and what have you, and then there's, German IPUG, COSIOM in Paris, Swiss maybe less so, Swiss IPUG, Dutch IPUG and whatever, all of these different trade associations, lots of work to be done. I think I'm going to call this to a close and just say thank you so much, Will, and we will talk soon.
Thanks, David.